All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously thought-provoking stuff today?
Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it.
We're tackling Steven Pinker's The Blank Slate. And let me tell you, this book is gonna rock your world.
Yeah, this one really throws down the gauntlet, doesn't it? It challenges some really fundamental assumptions about what it means to be human.
So Pinker's main argument is that this whole blank slate idea, this notion that we're born as empty vessels shaped solely by our experiences, well, it's kind of hogwash.
Yeah, he's not buying it. Pinker argues that the blank slate model, as popular as it's been, just doesn't hold up in light of modern science, especially when you look at fields like genetics and neuroscience.
Okay, so for those who might not be familiar with this whole blank slate thing, break it down for us. What does that even mean?
So imagine a blank slate. Right, a completely empty chalkboard. The blank slate theory basically says that we're born like that chalkboard with no inherent knowledge or predispositions. Everything we become, from our personalities to our beliefs, is solely a result of what's written on that slate by our experiences, our upbringing, our environment.
Okay, so it's that classic nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah,
But Pinker's saying, hold on a second, it's not that simple.
exactly. He's saying it's way more nuanced than that. He argues that we're actually hardwired from birth with certain tendencies, predispositions, even talents, all thanks to our evolutionary history.
So instead of a blank slate, we're more like, I don't know, a sketch pad, maybe with some faint outlines already there.
I like that analogy. And you know, what makes Pinker's argument so compelling is that he brings in evidence from so many different fields. He weaves together insights from evolutionary biology, psychology, even anthropology and linguistics to build this really multifaceted case.
See, this is what I love about a good deep dive. It's like, suddenly, we're questioning everything we thought we knew about ourselves. So Pinker's saying it's not nature or nurture, but this complex interplay between the two.
Exactly. He uses this term hierarchical reductionism to describe it. Sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty intuitive.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hit me with it. What's hierarchical reductionism all about?
Think about it like building a house. You've got the foundation, the walls, the roof. Those are like our genes, the basic building blocks that give us our structure, our potential.
Okay, I'm following so far.
But then you've got all the other stuff, right? The paint color, the furniture, the decorations, all of that represents our experiences, our environment, the unique way that each of us expresses our genes.
Okay, so our genes are like the blueprint, the basic structure,
Yeah.
but our experiences are what make each house unique.
Precisely. And Pinker's point is that we can't truly understand ourselves without considering both. And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to challenge two other really big ideas that have shaped how we think about ourselves: the noble savage and the ghost in the machine.
Okay, those sound intense. It's like we've stumbled into a philosophy seminar. Let's break them down one by one. What's the noble savage all about?
It's this idea that's been around for centuries, this romanticized notion that humans are, at their core, naturally peaceful and good. It's civilization, with all its rules and complexities, that corrupts us.
So we're all born innocent, and then society kind of mucks it up.
That's the basic idea. But Pinker, he's like, hold up a minute. He argues that if you look at human history, it's not that simple.
There's a bit more to the story.
Yeah, we definitely have the capacity for incredible kindness and cooperation, but we also have this darker side, this capacity for violence and cruelty. Pinker argues that ignoring this darker side, this part of our nature, doesn't do us any favors.
So it's about acknowledging the full spectrum of human nature, both the good and the bad. Okay, so that's the noble savage. What about this ghost in the machine idea? That one sounds especially trippy.
Oh, this one's a real mind bender. It gets at the heart of what we mean by consciousness, by the self. Imagine a pilot in one of those giant mechanical suits. The pilot is our consciousness, our soul, if you will, and the suit is our physical body, our brain.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So is Pinker saying this whole idea of a separate self, a conscious pilot calling the shots, is an illusion?
Not quite. He's not denying that we experience consciousness, that undeniable feeling of I that we all have. What he's suggesting is that this feeling of I is a product of our brains, not something that exists independently of them.
Okay, so it's more like the pilot and the suit are one the same. Our brains are creating this illusion of a separate self.
Exactly. Our brains are these incredible complex organs that create this sense of a unified self. It's a bit mind-blowing when you really think about it.
My mind is definitely blown. Okay, so If I'm following Pinker's argument correctly, he's basically saying that to really understand ourselves, we need to consider the whole picture, right?
Hmm.
Our biology, our genes, our evolutionary history, and our environment, our experiences, it's all connected.
You got it. And this is where things start to get really interesting because Pinker then takes all of these complex ideas about human nature and he connects them to our everyday lives. He talks about love, relationships, work, politics, morality, even parenting.
Okay, so we're not just talking about abstract theories here. This stuff has real-world implications. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's take a quick break to digest all of this. We'll be right back. All right, so we're back and ready to dive into the real-world implications of Pinker's ideas. You were saying before the break that he connects this whole blank slate debate to things like love and relationships.
Yeah, and this is where things get really interesting, I think,
Mhm.
because Pinker argues that even something as seemingly personal as who we're attracted to, well, it's not as random as we might think.
Okay, so you're telling me my love life could be explained by evolution. I got to hear this.
Right. It sounds kind of crazy at first, but it makes sense when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective. The name of the game, in terms of evolution, is passing on your genes, right?
Makes sense so far.
So it makes sense that we'd be attracted to people who display signs of good health, fertility, those kinds of things. Those are all traits that would have increased our ancestors' chances of reproductive success.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that explain why, like, some people are attracted to blondes, others to brunettes? It can't all be about survival of the fittest.
Well, that's where it gets even more fascinating. Pinker would argue that even those seemingly random preferences, they might be influenced by our evolutionary past.
Okay, I'll listen.
So certain features, like say symmetrical features or certain body types, they might have signaled access to resources or social status in our ancestral environment.
So you're telling me my taste in partners might be influenced by, like, cave people?
In a way, yes. But, and this is important, Pinker's not saying we're slaves to our biology. It's not that simple. It's more like our evolutionary history provides a foundation, but it's not the whole story.
Okay, so it's about understanding those deep-seated influences, but not letting them completely dictate our choices.
Precisely. And Pinker, to his credit, he doesn't shy away from the potentially controversial stuff either. He dives headfirst into complex issues like gender differences.
Okay, yeah, that's a topic where things can get a bit sensitive. How does Pinker approach such a nuanced issue?
He approaches it with, I think, a really admirable balance. He acknowledges that there are biological differences between men and women, and he suggests that understanding those differences can actually be helpful even in our quest for equality.
So it's not about denying the differences, but understanding how they might influence our behavior and social dynamics.
Exactly. But here's the crucial point. Pinker is a staunch advocate for equality. He very clearly believes that recognizing biological differences should never be used to justify discrimination or limit opportunities for anyone.
That's a really important distinction to make.
Mhm.
So we're not saying biology is destiny. It's more about recognizing those influences while still striving for a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And this nuanced approach extends to his discussion of, well, pretty much everything. Politics, morality, the challenges of parenting.
So Pinker's connecting this evolutionary perspective to a pretty wide range of human experiences. What about the really big questions, though? The ones that have been puzzling philosophers for centuries. Does he address those too?
Oh, absolutely. He dives right into those deep waters as well. Free will, the problem of evil, the meaning of life. He tackles them all through this lens of our evolved nature.
Okay, now that's what I call a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
So how does understanding our biology, our evolutionary history, help us grapple with these huge philosophical questions?
Well, let's take free will, for example. It's something that people have been debating for, well, probably as long as there have been people. But Pinker argues that if we accept that our brains are physical systems, shaped by both our genes and our experiences.
Okay, I'm following.
And then this idea of a completely independent will, something separate from our physical selves, it starts to break down a bit.
So it's not that we don't have choices,
Right.
but those choices are influenced by this complex web of factors, some of which we might not even be aware of.
Exactly. It's about understanding the biological underpinnings of our decisions, how they interact with our environment, our upbringing, all of it.
Okay, I think I'm starting to wrap my head around this.
Yeah.
So it's not that our biology dictates our every move. It's more like it sets the stage, but we're still the ones writing the play.
I love that analogy. It really gets at that balance between constraint and possibility that comes with being human.
This is all incredibly fascinating stuff, But I have to ask, Pinker's ideas are pretty radical, right? I mean, he's basically turning centuries of thought on its head. There must be some pushback, some criticism of his work.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime someone challenges deeply held beliefs, there's going to be debate. And that's a good thing. That's how we refine our understanding.
So what are some of the main criticisms of Pinker's work? What are the counter-arguments we should be aware of?
One of the main criticisms is that Pinker relies pretty heavily on evolutionary psychology, which, as we mentioned earlier, is a relatively new field.
So it's still a work in progress.
Exactly. And some argue that it's still too early to draw such definitive conclusions about human behavior based solely on evolutionary theories.
So it's like he's building a skyscraper on a foundation that's still under construction.
That's a good way to put it, and it's a valid point. We have to be cautious about jumping to conclusions, especially when it comes to something as complex as human behavior.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is warranted. What else? Are there any other major criticisms?
Another one is that while Pinker does acknowledge the role of culture and environment, some critics argue that he doesn't give them quite enough credit.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, recognizing the influence of both nature and denurture without overemphasizing one or the other.
Exactly, and it's a balance that's often hard to strike, especially in a debate that's often framed in such black and white terms.
It sounds like Pinker's work has really sparked an important conversation, even if not everyone agrees with his conclusions.
Absolutely. And that's the mark of a truly influential thinker, isn't it? Someone who can challenge our perspectives and make us think more deeply about what it means to be human.
Well said. So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into the blank slate, what's the big takeaway for you? What's the one idea you want our listeners to walk away with?
Yeah, for me, it's this idea that we're not just these blank slates, right? Like we're not just products of our environment, but we're also not prisoners of our biology. It's this fascinating middle ground where we have these predispositions, these tendencies, but we also have this incredible capacity for change, for growth, for making conscious choices.
Right, it's not like we're puppets on a string, right?
Exactly. Pinker's work is not about saying, this is who you are and you can't change it. It's more about like, okay, here are some of the underlying influences, the tendencies, but within that framework, you still have a lot of agency.
It's like he's giving us the tools to kind of understand the machine of our own minds a little bit better. And with that understanding comes, hopefully, a greater sense of freedom of agency.
Totally. We can start to see those patterns, those tendencies that might be holding us back, and then we can make conscious choices to break those patterns.
And that brings us to another really important point, which is that recognizing the influence of our biology, our genes, it doesn't let us off the hook when it comes to taking responsibility for our actions.
Right.
We can't just say, oh, it's my genes, there's nothing I can do about it.
Absolutely not. Pinker is very clear about that. He argues that understanding our nature is not about excusing bad behavior. It's about equipping ourselves to make better choices.
So it's not a free pass. It's more like, okay, now that you know the rules of the game, you can play more strategically.
Exactly. And that's empowering, isn't it, to realize that we have more agency than we might have thought.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, all this talk about evolution and biology and these really deep philosophical questions, it can feel a bit heavy at times. Like, where's the hope in all of this? Where's the inspiration?
That's a great question. And I think the hope lies in the fact that we're even having this conversation. The fact that we're exploring these ideas, questioning our assumptions, that's a sign of progress.
So you're saying that the very act of questioning, of seeking a deeper understanding of ourselves, is a sign of hope?
Absolutely. It shows that we're not content with simplistic answers, that we're willing to grapple with complexity, to really wrestle with these big questions. And that, to me, is incredibly hopeful.
That's a beautiful thought. And I think it speaks to the power of books like The Blank Slate, right? They challenge us, they make us uncomfortable, but they also push us to grow. They help us see the world and ourselves in a new light.
And sometimes that's exactly what we need, you know, a new perspective, a fresh way of looking at things to spark our curiosity, to ignite that desire to learn and grow.
Well said. Okay, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from evolutionary psychology to the nature of consciousness to the challenges of building a just and equitable society.
It's been a wild ride.
It really has. But the conversation doesn't end here, right? This is really just the beginning.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of it. Pinker's book is a starting point. It's sparked so many debates, so much new research. It's challenged all of us to think differently about ourselves and the world around us.
And that's what we hope this deep dive has done for you, our listeners. We've given you a taste of these ideas, but the real work begins now. It's time to sit with these concepts, wrestle with them, See how they resonate with your own experiences and beliefs.
Ask yourself the tough questions. Challenge your own assumptions. Don't be afraid of the complexity. Embrace it. And never stop exploring, never stop trying to understand the mysteries of what makes you you.
Beautifully said. And on that note, to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the blank slate. Keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you next time for another adventure in knowledge.